Very good evening. We are now here discussing about the properties of indifference curve. Now, the properties of indifference curve are basically of five in number altogether, what we get in ISC class 12 or whatever we basically study in microeconomics are the 5 different properties or features of indifference curve. The first feature of indifference curve is a downward sloping curve from left to right. It is a downward sloping curve from left to right. Second property is indifference curves never intersect each other. Indifference curves never intersect each other. The third property is indifference curves neither starts from any axis nor end to any axis. Fourth property is indifference curve is convex to the origin. Indifference curve is convex to the origin. And the last assumption is higher the indifference curve, higher the satisfaction. Right? We are discussing about the first point, that is indifference curve is a downward sloping curve. Whenever we talk about a downward sloping curve, we keep into consideration that a curve becomes a downward sloping curve from left to right only when one criteria gets fulfilled. What is the criteria? If you want to get one commodity more, you have to sacrifice the other. Like we have the x-axis at the base, we have y-axis over there in vertical, right? So x and y-axis are the x good and y good, and I'm a rational consumer, right? My income is given as well as it's constant. Now when I want to get more amount of x, I am sacrificing my y consumption, and if I want to get more amount of y, I have to sacrifice x. So x goods are obtained only when there is a sacrifice of y, or y goods are obtained only when there is a sacrifice of x. Both the items can never be obtained more and more amount. Why? As resources are constant. Here my resource is my income. My income is constant and it's fixed. That's a constraint to me or a limitation to me. So if I want to get more of one commodity, I have to sacrifice the other. That makes a curve downward sloping. Downward sloping. I guess I'm clear to everybody? Right? Our second feature is indifference curve is convex to the origin. When do you understand by the word convex, or what do you understand by the word convexity? A convexity of a curve take place when the slope of that particular curve decreases. Remember that very nicely. When the slope of any curve decreases, the curve becomes convex to the origin. Here we talk about IC or indifference curve. Now indifference curve's slope can also be calculated by the formula sacrifice by gain. Sacrifice is delta y and gain is delta x. Now delta y by delta x as a slope of IC is known as what? Marginal rate of substitution. ইনডিফারেন্স কার্ভের স্লোপকে আমরা কি নাম দিয়েছি? মার্জিনাল রেট অফ সাবস্টিটিউশন। যদি মার্জিনাল রেট অফ সাবস্টিটিউশন ফল করে, তার মানে কি স্লোপ অফ ইনডিফারেন্স কার্ভ ফল করছে। স্লোপ অফ ইনডিফারেন্স কার্ভ ফল করা মানেই দ্য কার্ভ ইজ কনভেক্স টু দি অরিজিন। এটা আরও একরকমভাবে বোঝানো যায়, তার জন্য আমি বলবো আই নিড টু ফোকাস হিয়ার ইন দি কপি। I need to show this particular thing in the copy. Look, I am drawing here an indifference curve. Here I am having the x good, and here I am having the y good. It's the origin. This is what the IC look like, right? Now I am drawing here x all in same gap. Every x are there in my diagram having a same gap, right? It is x1, it's x2, it's x3, it's x4, and it's x5. It is y1, it is y2, it is y3, it is y4, and it is y5. Right? Now, let us suppose that there is a deal between me and Ram. I was having X, I was having Y, and this is Ram who was having X good. There was a tiffin period, and I have dealt with Ram that Ram, if you give me some amount of X item, I would like to give you what? Some amount of Y. Ram came in the tiffin period to me. I have given some amount of X to Ram in an expectation that Ram should sacrifice some amount of Y and give it to me. Yeah, Ram did that. Ram have given me this much amount of Y. How much amount of Y? This much amount of Y, which was quite more than what I sacrificed. Yes or no? Right? Now, I again have given this one. I saw Ram sacrificing for me this time became less than the previous one. I've again given Ram the same amount of X. But this time Ram's sacrifice on Y was bit lesser than the previous one also. Again I've given Ram same amount of X. Now this time the rate of sacrifice became lesser and lesser. So what I found that Ram was sacrificing more amount of Y initially, but his sacrifice rate of Y continuously decreased. So rate of sacrifice of Y becomes less in order to get same amount of X. So to get same amount of X, the rate of sacrifice of Y decreases. If this happens, then the curve is always convex to the origin. So a curve becomes convex to the origin when the sacrifice by gain, that is delta Y by delta X, which is also known as marginal rate of substitution of XY, this goes on falling. When this will fall, the curve will always become convex to the origin. The curve will always become convex. Am I clear? So if the board asks you when do indifference curve shows a convexity, or what do you understand by a convexity of IC, or why do the IC becomes convex to the origin, the answer would be 2 points. Number one, you will draw this diagram first and you will write rate of sacrifice of Y becomes lesser and lesser to get same amount of X. The first point. And the second point is the slope of IC is also known as marginal rate of substitution. When the ratio of sacrifice and gain, this MRS, falls continuously, the curve also becomes convex. These are the 2 points to understand convexity, the first property. The second property says, this was the second property. The first property was IC is downward sloping. I told you one thing, that IC is downward sloping means, suppose this is an IC curve, this is X and this is Y. If I was here in this combination A, I was finding X1 and Y1, right? If I want to get more amount of X, I need to sacrifice some amount of Y. I can never get this much amount of additional X without sacrificing Y. I have to sacrifice some amount of delta Y to get some delta amount of X. So whenever you sacrifice, you want to obtain X, you have to sacrifice Y. Or else if you want to sacrifice X, then only you can obtain Y. This makes a curve downward sloping curve. Done?